Sometimes life does not feel impossible. It just feels like too much all at once. Too many small demands. Too many unfinished things. Too many decisions still hanging in the background. And instead of pushing through, you go flat. You stop replying. You stop deciding. You stop starting. Even simple things begin to feel heavier than they should. A lot of people call this laziness, or avoidance, or lack of discipline. But often that is not what is happening. Sometimes what looks like laziness is actually shutdown. And shutdown is different. Shutdown is what happens when the system stops trying to manage the pressure by pushing harder and starts protecting itself by pulling back. That is why it can feel so confusing. Because part of you still cares. You still know what needs to be done. You still feel the pressure of it sitting there. But the more demanding everything feels, the less available you become. That is the pattern. When life starts feeling emotionally expensive, the brain does not always respond with action. Sometimes it responds with narrowing. Less energy, less movement, less flexibility, less willingness to engage. From the outside, this can look passive. From the inside, it often feels like being mentally cornered. You are not relaxed. You are not at peace. You are not choosing rest. You just cannot seem to mobilize. That happens because the nervous system has limits. When pressure builds for long enough, the brain starts shifting resources away from openness and exploration and toward protection. At first, that protection may look like anxiety. You think more. You scan more. You feel more urgency. You try to stay ahead of what might go wrong. But if the pressure keeps building, a different response can take over. Instead of speeding up, the system starts pulling down. That is when things can start to feel numb, foggy, flat, and weirdly heavy. Not because the tasks changed, because your available energy did. This is one reason people can look at a very normal to-do list and feel instantly defeated. The list is not always the real problem. The problem is the state you are in when you look at it. If your system already feels overloaded, even small demands can land like one more thing you cannot carry. That is why shutdown often shows up in modern life as ordinary dysfunction. You do not always collapse dramatically. You just stop being able to do what usually feels simple. Replying feels hard. Choosing feels hard. Opening the laptop feels hard. Starting the task feels hard. Even thinking about the task starts to create resistance. The mistake people make is assuming that because the tasks are small, the struggle must be irrational. But the brain does not measure demand only by the size of the task. It also measures how many open loops are already active, how little energy is available, how uncertain the outcome feels, how judged or trapped you feel, whether you believe there is room to recover. So what looks small from the outside can still land as too much inside the system. This is why shutdown is often preceded by buildup. You have been carrying pressure for a while. You have been making decisions without feeling settled. You have been trying to stay functional while mentally tired. You have been dealing with enough uncertainty, urgency, or emotional friction that the system starts losing flexibility. Then one more demand appears. And it is not the biggest demand that breaks the flow. It is just the next one. That is why people sometimes say things like, "I do not know why this is affecting me so much. It is not even that serious. I should be able to handle this." But shutdown is rarely about one isolated thing. It is usually cumulative. That matters because shame makes it worse. If your system is already overloaded and then you start attacking yourself for not functioning normally, the sense of pressure grows. Now the task is not just a task. It becomes proof that you are failing. And once that happens, the nervous system tightens even more. That is why pushing harder is not always the solution. Sometimes pressure is the thing causing the collapse. So what helps? First, stop interpreting shutdown as proof of who you are. It is a state, not an identity. It means your system is overloaded, narrowed, or bracing. It does not automatically mean you are lazy, weak, or incapable. That distinction matters because identity shame turns temporary shutdown into something much harder to recover from. Second, reduce the active weight before demanding action. A lot of people try to solve shutdown by forcing motivation. But motivation is usually not the first missing piece. Usable capacity is. So instead of asking, how do I make myself do everything? Ask, what can I remove, reduce, delay, define, or shrink right now? That question is much more useful because the nervous system responds better to reduced load than to self-pressure. If 5 things feel too heavy, make the goal 1 thing. If 1 thing still feels too heavy, reduce it to the first visible step. If even that feels hard, reduce the environment. Shut the tabs. Put the phone down. Move the notebook closer. Make the task smaller than your resistance. Not because that solves everything instantly, because it gives your system something more possible to work with. Third, understand that shutdown often needs safety before productivity. This is the part people skip. They want output first. But the nervous system often needs to feel less trapped before it becomes available again. Sometimes that means sitting down without demanding immediate performance, naming what feels too much, choosing one next mo instead of the whole plan, letting the body settle before asking for complex effort. That is not indulgent. It is strategic. Because a braced system does not suddenly become clear through criticism. It becomes clearer when the demand stops feeling endless. And one more thing matters. Not everything that feels urgent is equally important. When people feel overloaded, everything can start blending into one undifferentiated wall of pressure. That makes shutdown worse because the mind stops seeing shape. So one of the most useful things you can do is separate. What matters now? What matters later? What does not matter as much as your stress is claiming? That restores a sense of proportion. And proportion restores movement. So if life has been making you shut down lately, do not ask only, why am I like this? Ask something more useful. What is my system reacting to right now? That question is less shaming and more accurate, because sometimes the issue is not that you are unwilling to act. It is that your brain has started treating ordinary demands like one long unbroken threat. Once that happens, shutdown makes more sense. And once it makes more sense, you can respond differently. Not by waiting to feel powerful, not by attacking yourself into motion, but by making things feel less impossible to carry. That is often where movement begins again. And if this spoke to something you have been dealing with, the next video should be why small tasks feel so hard, because shutdown often starts long before collapse, in the strange weight that ordinary tasks begin to carry.